Life will thrive wherever there are available spaces. The rapid spread of urbanization has limited the spaces where plant and animal species can live. Within the urban communities, there are usually very few green spaces, which makes it difficult for plant and animal life to flourish. This need creates an alternative approach to conservation.
There is always a challenge when you have to, let's say you have to design a reserve, right? A reserve network. What that means is that you are going to select sites according to their biodiversity qualities, but also in terms of how affected are they. So the idea is to have a balance between a very high priority in terms of biodiversity, but also not a completely damaged place. Because a completely damaged place is pretty much gone. So it's not anymore a priority. But if it's intermediate, the amount of fragmentation or damage, then that may be a target for conservation. No? Also because fragmentation and urbanization has been increasing, so we would like to see the incorporation of little or smaller areas forming what we may think as archipelago reserve. I think those are key concepts to understand the contribution of certain gardens or protected areas, or depending on their hierarchy or the category that we're talking about. No, this may be from biosphere reserves to gardens.
There are different types of protected and unprotected green spaces. The levels of interaction that people have with these areas vary greatly. Official protected areas, like state or national reserves or parks, have limited community interactions as compared to unprotected areas like community gardens. While they are not officially protected areas, they are still spaces maintained by communities. Fueled by a push for access to local sustainable food sources, more and more empty lots and rooftops are being converted into vibrant community gardens. With all of this in mind, we decided to explore how initiatives like community gardens can help us to understand some of the interactions between people and protected areas in Lawrence, Kansas. Our first stop was with Sustainability Coordinator Eileen Horn to talk about a city project to promote community gardening in the Lawrence area to both combat food insecurity but also to increase green space.
So the Common Ground program kind of came out of this conversation recognizing that we have two food deserts in Lawrence. East Lawrence and North Lawrence both qualify as USDA food deserts. So that means that residents in those neighborhoods lack access to grocery stores, which are typically the places where you can get fresh, healthy produce. And so we were recognizing that there was a need in our community and that it takes a while to get a grocery store to locate to a community, but it only takes a couple months to get a garden going. So we started to design a program that would basically take our vacant city-owned properties that are scattered throughout the city. They're vacant corners of parks, they're vacant lots in between houses that we bought for stormwater reasons. And how could we repurpose those and help people grow food on them? The Common Ground program was established in 2010 and 2011, and it came out of this conversation that was happening with our Douglas County Food Policy Council. So we have a group of 23 stakeholders that advise the city and the county commission on what are the local policies we can do here to affect the food system and to improve it, because the global food system we don't have very much say over, but as local governments there are things that we can do in our community to help make it easier and more likely that people will eat healthy locally grown food. So most of the sites were either vacant lots that sometimes the city will purchase. In North Lawrence, for example, we purchased an acre because we had to locate a pump station there, but we located the pump station at the far end of the lot. So there was a full acre in grass, just sitting there having to be mowed and maintained by city staff. All of the sites were in just grass, typical turf grass prior to being cultivated. So they had pretty limited biological diversity, as you can imagine. Initially, we talked about some of the properties along Riverfront Park, and those have been reseeded in native grasses and prairies, and we decided we didn't they're great agricultural land because it's river bottom soil, but we decided we didn't really want to compete with that important function as well. And also, those are really great wildlife corridors. And the last thing we felt our growers would want to do is stick a lot of tasty fruits and vegetables right in deer habitat. So, I mean, there are a lot of considerations on both sides when we've brought sites forward. In one case, we went to the Pinckney neighborhood, and we proposed Burcham Park because we thought, oh, this is a great neighborhood park, river bottom soils, they'll be so excited about this. And it was great because they said, no way, we'll have to put up an insane deer fence because we see so many wildlife. And they kind of pushed back and said, we don't think it's a good site. And the more we thought about it, the neighbors know, they're down there walking their dog every day and they see it. So we removed that one from our list.
This is there's a habitat for rabbits, and it's a habitat for squirrels. It's a habitat for all kinds of animals that they're beneficial and they need a place to go. It's a good habitat too for the native plants, for native edible plants, for native medicinal plants that people are forgetting the use of, and that's something that we can do and bring together and preserve the plants, and through that we're also preserving the insects and the wildlife that feed on those plants. And we hope to expand that greatly here. So over there, there's not a sign yet, but we're intending to get one because it's an official monarch way station, which means that this is a place that, butterflies can go and find a food plant or find a host plant that they need in order to preserve those populations, because, a couple hundred years ago they had this whole space, and now it's only being confined to these small little lots where people need to invest that kind of energy and that kind of care into those plants in order to care for these native pollinators, because they won't survive otherwise. This is a very important place for the monarch butterfly especially. And so we have milkweed along the fence, and we're going to plant a lot more as the season goes on. The Native Medicinal Plant Research Garden is kind enough to let us get some cuttings from there, so we're going to be doing some transplants over the next month or two to try to get a lot more habitat in for not just butterflies, but for many animals, native animals and insects. And it's really, it's not just the human community that we're trying to preserve here, it's the whole ecological community, the whole cultural community in Lawrence.
Some of the things we've tried to encourage is plantings of flowers and other things to attract pollinators, because I think that's another thing that we sometimes leave out of this conversation is what can we do in our city parks and our green spaces to support pollinator populations that are currently in decline. The pollinator issue has been a pretty recent development with colony collapse disorder and other things becoming more mainstream and more understood. And so I think, connections with existing organizations like Monarch Watch, and also like the Kansas Rural Center is doing a lot of work with beekeeping and pollinators right now. So I think that's a way we could develop, and potentially a good use for some of the properties that we identified in Common Ground, but maybe the soil isn't great for growing vegetables, but it could support some native flowers and plantings that could be great monarch way stations.
In the city, there are different approaches to this concept, from government-promoted projects like the Common Ground plots to the KU student farm initiatives and backyard organic gardening.
This is the oldest community garden in Lawrence, and so it's really very important space to protect and, respect this space and everything that's been put into it. This stuff is a sign to the community that people are invested in this space, and this is a space that we really do want to bring the community into. Because it's a really powerful tool to grow food with people and to sustain yourselves and to grow together like that. We're going to focus very heavily on companion planting and growing food that grows well with each other, and incorporating lots of native plants and bringing the pollinators in and trying to create just a happy habitat for everyone while growing really great food.
I'm especially interested in this fence. For me, it has an opportunity to be what I might call creative neighboring. It's an opportunity to make a place where people can learn about this community garden and the activities within it. So if you start to think about a fence that has signage or little messages on it as a way to engage people that are passing by, it seems to me it's a perfect place for education to happen and for people to see community life taking place. This fence that I'm imagining, we've been talking, is perhaps will have tons of flowers planted all around it. And so a concept here is to create flowers with a pair of scissors, and as people walk by, they can pick their own bouquet and become part of the community in that way.
Community gardens themselves are invaluable educational spaces. They connect people and encourage exchanges of knowledge and expertise.
The particulars about how they garden is up to each garden, and I'm so glad we did it that way instead of micromanaging it, because it has allowed the creativity of all of these groups to really shine through. For example, some of them have done, so the one at John Taylor Park decided to do a community garden, but then also integrate children because the Ballard Center preschool is right there. So they have this sensory garden with all these herbs that smell good and are fun for kids to play in, and they have these adorable square meter plots for the kids to garden. And so they have a different aesthetic than the permaculture garden on 13th in Pennsylvania, which is communally managed, and it's all permaculture, so there aren't individual plots, and it looks really different than people's concept of a traditional community garden. So I think what I think about it is our role as a city was to make this opportunity available, and then to choose responsibly based on the applicants, and then kind of get out of their way and let the community interest and enthusiasm just take off.
All this diverse knowledge started to dream a little bit in this space to think about alternative ways we could use the garden to educate and create community. So we were talking about water, we were talking about birdhouses on the posts, about bats that could help with the insects. I think there's all sorts of things that we could start to think about that would allow us to make a pretty good interdisciplinary garden.
Engaging directly with the environment helps people become more aware of broader global issues like conservation, climate change, sustainability, and biodiversity, as well as to understand their individual impacts on the environment.
These have turned into these vibrant green community spaces where it used to be a vacant lot. And so where it used to be a vacant lot where like maybe one neighbor let their dog run around on it, now it's this community gathering place. And so I think these spaces have that potential to help build community capital. They also create green space for people to have recreation and community building. And they also help us meet those access to healthy food goals because the majority of our common ground sites are located in East and North Lawrence, which is where we have food deserts. And food production was the goal, but I really do think that this provides, what could the vision look like if citizens can adopt a park, but not a city park? Like they actually maintain a park on city property, and they could, we could kind of unleash that same creativity that we're seeing in food production in a way where we could more actively engage with our citizens in managing properties.
The way I think of this is education is what makes the difference. So in that context, in the context of understanding the relationship of humans with nature and how much we depend on that, is that if you know that, you understand that, and you are educated in that for that matter, then you will value that, and that's the best way you can go. If people value what they have, so having people in the community that understand the value of having gardens and the services that those offer, and not bringing products from around the globe, but perhaps using more what you can grow locally and things like that, is what will make the difference. So definitely, it's not about scientists, it's about the people that live everywhere, locally. You can think about this as a local process and local communities. It's more than something regional. At the end, is the effort of people at local scale, and that's where decisions are taken. So a farmer will be taking the decision of what to plant and what to do with his land or her land, and that's what will happen at the end. So having that person informed and loving what they grow and do, and understanding there are processes underneath that we scientists value, but they may not understand it that way, is what counts at the end.